Hello, my Econ students. So we're here with our second section of notes for this last unit on international trade. And what we're looking at are the main arguments and the ways that people argue against free trade. Now, as you know, I'm a fan of free trade. We've already seen that. We talked about that with the first set of notes and then with yesterday's worksheet. And again, just a reminder about the worksheet. I know it's a little bit tricky with the math. So if there's any part of it that you didn't understand, please watch the video that I've posted that goes over it, because you can get a little bit lost. It's not that hard of a concept, but the first time you see it, it can be a little bit weird because it's just probably something you've never seen before. So please take a few moments and look at that. It will pay you big dividends, I promise you. But anyway, that being said, you know I'm a fan of free trade. That doesn't mean that there aren't people out there that think free trade is a bad thing. So the first thing I'm going to address here is the trade restrictions, types of trade restrictions. Now there are several different types of trade restrictions. What we're talking about here is by far and away the most common, which is a tariff. There are also quotas and trade embargoes and other things like this. We're not going to get into that so much because they're much less common than tariffs. Okay, so let's talk about tariffs here. First of all, what is a tariff? A tariff is a tax on an import. Okay, so it's the idea that we're going to bring in or buy a product from another country. We're going to put a big tax on it. Why do we do this? The main rationale behind a tariff is by raising the price of the foreign good, it encourages more Americans to buy American goods. Okay, so there's an American pair of blue jeans and a pair of blue jeans, say, from China. Well, we put a big tax on the Chinese blue jeans. It raises the price of the Chinese blue jeans. It makes the American pair of blue jeans a little bit more attractive, right? In the sense that they're cheaper, so I'd rather buy that. And so that's the idea, that's the goal. And so ultimately the goal is to protect American industry, right? If we're hurting foreign goods, it's going to encourage more people to buy American goods. So one of the things that people forget about, of course, is what happened exactly after Trump put all these tariffs on Chinese goods. China retaliates by putting tariffs on our goods. And I can tell you right now, farmers who were exporting a lot of food, used to export a lot of food to China, they're not very happy about this because China has put big taxes on our food going over there, and now they're not buying as much of our food, and it's really hurt farmers. And so there's all kinds of problems I have with tariffs. I'm not a big fan, that being one of them. But let me go through 4 specific things that I think tariffs, why they're problematic. All right, so problems with tariffs. The first one, in general, tariffs lower the standard of living. Very simply put, it's us as consumers that end up having to pay higher prices for goods. If we're going to raise the price of goods, be that foreign or domestic goods, doesn't matter. If we raise the price of goods, we can't buy as many things. If we can't buy as many things, our standard of living goes down. And so ultimately, it's the American consumer, which is almost everybody, who is going to be hurt by this. So that in and of itself makes me not a big fan of tariffs, right? Because we end up paying the cost of them. All right, but there's some other ones as well I want to dive into. So letter B, tariffs tend to cause inefficiency. So remember what we learned from the comparative and absolute advantage worksheet. We always want to make our comparative advantage. If we don't have the comparative advantage, go ahead and let the other country make it. Okay? So one of the problems with tariffs is there are products that we might not have the comparative advantage in. All right? And those are products and those are industries that should leave America and go to other countries. Well, by handicapping those countries, by raising the price of their goods, it allows some of those industries to stay. And I know it sounds cold and callous, but those industries maybe should leave. Because by leaving, and we're going to see this in a second with a little demonstration I'm going to give you, by leaving, it's freeing up resources to make the things that we're really good at. And we can make more of. And let the other countries make those things, and they'll make more, and then we all have more in the end. Well, when you put on tariffs, that balance does not take place, and we tend to lose the problem there. So basically, inefficient businesses or industries are allowed to stay in the game, whereas maybe they shouldn't be staying in the game. All right, letter C. Third one, tariffs can also hurt complementary domestic businesses. What on earth is a complementary domestic business? It's any business that uses the product that has the tariff on it. So an easy example would be steel. We have big tariffs on steel. So U.S. car manufacturers are handicapped because they have to pay a higher price for steel then do car manufacturers in Japan or in Germany or in Italy or wherever that maybe don't have those tariffs. And so it actually hurts our ability to compete in cars because they have to pay a higher price. Another great example, and this is one of the reasons why you're going to see pretty soon why I'm so jaded against tariffs. Tariffs are one of the reasons why for about a 2-year period there were no Twinkies being made. That sweet golden spongy cake goodness I was deprived of for almost 2 years because we have we pay in America one of the highest prices for sugar in the world. Okay, so 2 things caused the Hostess company to basically go out of business. Number 1, high sugar tariffs that made it really expensive to make their sweets because they're buying a lot of sugar, obviously, and so they couldn't compete with foreign companies that were paying a lower price for sugar. The unions were also problematic. We talked about unions last unit, and again, I'm not a huge fan of unions for the most part, and so unions, both of those problems basically put them out of business. Fortunately, there was a Mexican food conglomerate that bought up the Hostess brand, and now we have Twinkies again, but there's a period where it was a rough couple years there, and so again, Hostess was hurt by that. Hostess uses sugar, there's big tariffs on sugar, and now they are at a disadvantage because the price of sugar is too high for them. Now, ironically, the last one, tariffs can sometimes actually hurt the very industry they're intended to protect. And you're like, well, that doesn't make any sense. If we put tariffs on sugar, the goal is to raise the price of foreign sugar so people buy more American sugar. Or if we put tariffs on steel, it raises the price of foreign steel and makes American companies more likely to buy American steel. Here's the problem, though. What happens to the price of those products in general? They're going to go up. Sugar is going to be more expensive. Steel is going to be more expensive. What companies do sometimes, and this has happened many times historically, is they will switch to alternatives or substitutes. In other words, instead of using sugar, they switch to, say, high fructose corn syrup or some other form of sweetener. Instead of using steel to make cars, they start using plastics or alloys. And in fact, after steel tariffs were passed, the steel industry actually went into decline, and estimates are that several 100,000 steel workers lost their jobs because companies en masse just said, steel's just too expensive. We're going to switch to something else entirely, and it can actually hurt the industry that it's intended to protect. So, as you can see, not a big fan of tariffs. I'm a big fan of free trade, but again, that's not to stop people from being against free trade. So let me give you 3 of the main, most common arguments that you'll hear as to why free trade is a bad thing, and I will hopefully debunk them. So the first one is if we trade freely, we're going to have major trade deficits. So quick reminder, I know we talked about this in Unit 1, this is important though. Make sure you know this because it's going to show up on this test. The definition of a trade deficit and a trade surplus. So a trade deficit is a situation where we import more than we export. Why is that a deficit? Well, remember, because when we import, when we buy more from other countries than we sell to them, we owe them money, and money leaves the country, and that's called a trade deficit. A trade surplus, on the other hand, which is always thought of as a good thing, is a situation where we export more than we import, okay? And the goal there is by selling more than buying, other countries owe us the money, and the money comes in. Well, a couple of problems I have with this, why that's such a problem. Number 1, we've already talked about this in Unit 1, remember the real nature of wealth. Real wealth is not money, real wealth is goods and services. Okay, so I'm not too concerned about sending our money to other countries when we're receiving in exchange goods and services, which is the real nature of wealth, okay, not money. But the other thing about it that we're going to see with tomorrow's lecture and quiz is that in the end, trade always balances, okay? So in other words, we're going to see, because the trade accounts, you got 2 accounts. Bottom line is, I don't want to get ahead of myself right now. The money is going to make its way back. If your concern is, oh my gosh, but all this money is leaving our country, one way or another, the money makes its way back. Either other countries take that money and turn around and buy our stuff with it, or they turn around and reinvest it back in the United States. And both are positives for us. And so at the end of the day, again, just remember the notion, if we're trading, it must have been beneficial to us, because that's how voluntary exchange works. You don't trade unless it benefits you. So people get concerned about, oh my gosh, trade deficits and this and that. I just don't get concerned. Trade always balances. The money makes its way back whether we got a deficit or surplus, we must be doing it because it's of a net benefit to us. The second argument is loss of jobs. People say if we trade freely, all these companies are going to pack up and go to other countries and take all these American jobs because we can't compete, American workers can't compete with cheap foreign labor. Now, I have a real easy way of helping you figure out that yes, indeed, we can compete with foreign labor. Ask yourself this question: do you know any American who has a job? If you know a single American who has a job, well, apparently we can compete. We have something to offer, and that something is productivity. So yes, while workers in other parts of the world might be willing to work for a lot less, that's not the only consideration a business has to take into account. It's also the fact that, okay, so they're making shoes on the other side of the world. They have to ship those shoes back over here, which is probably their main market, right? And that costs money. American workers as a whole, because we might have greater access to education, greater skills, experience, familiarity with machines and technology, we tend to be more productive. In other words, we can make more shoes than can other workers who are less educated, less experienced, skilled, and whatnot. And so we do have something to offer. We are more productive. And so just like we showed with NAFTA, remember what happened after we passed NAFTA? All three countries, America, Mexico, and Canada, gained jobs because we experienced the efficiencies that come along with trade and the benefits of trade, and so that one is not of great concern. The last one, and I'm going to show you a little kind of a chart here to help demonstrate this, is loss of industry. If we open up borders, some industries are going to pack up and leave. Yes, they are. Now, as we already learned, based on what we talked about with comparative advantage, that could be a good thing. Okay, and so let me give you a quick, I don't want to take too much time here, but I think this really helps to visualize kind of how the process works. So I'm going to draw just kind of a sample, what are some of the things that we can make in this country? Well, on one end of the spectrum, we have things that I'm going to call light manufacturing. Okay, so light manufacturing, things that don't take a lot of skills or machinery or equipment or knowledge or technology to produce. Easy things. I'm going to give you examples in a second. On the other hand, we have things that require heavy or very technological manufacturing. Okay, things that take a lot of skills and resources and things like that. So what are some examples of each? So on this end, you're going to have things like, say, toys. Like little McDonald's toys or little, things like that that are pretty easy to make. You might have things like clothes. Clothes don't necessarily take a ton of technology to produce. Then you might have things like small appliances, okay, things like blenders and toasters and maybe microwaves and things like that. Then you get into large appliances. Okay, things like refrigerators and dishwashers and washers and dryers and whatnot. Of course, then you get into things like cars. And then you get into things like TVs. And again, these are things that require more technology and whatnot. Computers, okay, cell phones, maybe, obviously, things that require tons of technology, right? So here's the thing. Remember the idea of opportunity cost, right? Can we make these things down here? Absolutely. We have the technology, we have the means, we could make those things easily. But the problem is this: the more we make these things down here, the less resources we have available to make these things down here. Now, these things down here are really cool. Cool in the sense that they can make a lot of money and they're in high demand, right? And so if we had to choose between which ones are we going to make, are we going to make on this end of the spectrum or this end, we obviously want to be on this end. But we can't get to this end unless we shed things down here. So to move up the scale, at some point we have to say, let other countries make the toys. Okay, we don't care if they make toys for McDonald's or the little whatever, the little dolls and all that kind of stuff. Just let them make that. We're making cool things. We're coming down here. Now, fun fact, at one point in our nation, a big portion of our country's history, clothes or textiles was kind of the backbone of our economy. It was one of our main exports, one of our main industries. Fast forward to the 1920s though. we're starting to get into some of these small and large appliances, and especially one of the things that happens in the 1920s is the explosion of cars. Not that cars weren't around earlier, but the mass production of cars that Henry Ford brought with his assembly line and all that started to come into play. Well, again, in order to free up resources to move this direction, we have to give something up, and that something starts to be clothing or textiles. And so we start to lose lose some of our clothing industry. Now, in the early 1900s, do you think people were freaking out because we were losing our clothing industry? Of course they were. Oh my gosh, what are we going to do without clothes? Well, we're going to do these things without clothes, these cool things, right? And then as we start moving up into the 50s and 60s, and now TVs become relevant, we start getting into that. We start saying, Japan make the blenders. Let them make the toasters, the vacuum cleaners. We're fine with that. We're making cool stuff up here, right? And then we continue to move up, and we get into the 70s, and we start making computers and software that goes along with it. You put that on here, and cell phones and all these things. Well, again, a funny thing happens in the late 70s and early 80s. We've already talked about this. America starts to lose its car industry. Not entirely, but Japan now sells more cars than America does. And why is that? Because in order to move up the scale, what do we have to do? We have to shed some things. Were people freaking out in the 70s and 80s? Oh my gosh, what are we going to do without cars? Of course they were, right? Because it was such an important part of our economy for so long, and we were the world leader. Well, again, we can't keep moving forward unless we give these things up. Okay, and so right now, we're kind of on this end as far as the major parts of our economy and major exports. I promise you, probably 50 years from now, maybe 30 years from now, I don't know. Right now, we are the world's leading manufacturer of software and software design and some of these things here. 30, 40, 50 years from now, we're probably going to start losing that. Other countries are probably going to start overtaking that part of our economy. And are people going to freak out? Of course they are, because that's what they do. And people are going to say, oh my gosh, what are we going to do without TVs and computers and cell phones and software? Well, we're going to do whatever comes next. I don't know. Teleportation, flying cars, automatic driving cars, space travel. Who knows what the future holds, right? We couldn't have predicted 50 years ago we'd have cell phones like we do today. I don't know what comes next. Okay, but in order to move that way, we have to give some things up. And this is what countries go through. They go through this process of starting low and moving up. It's funny, not too long ago, I remember my mom was over at my house, and all of a sudden she made this comment that seemed to come out of nowhere. And the comment she made was, have you noticed that Vietnam is the new China? I was like, Mom, what are you talking about? Well, apparently she had been looking at one of my kids' toys. And the sticker on the toy said, Made in Vietnam. And she said, if you noticed, clothes, toys, things like that, they all used to have little stickers that said Made in China. Now you're starting to see more and more of these things that they're saying Made in Vietnam. And I said, that didn't surprise me. Because guess what's happened in China? They started here, and what's China been doing? They've been industrializing and growing. And as they move up the scale, they say, let Vietnam make the toys. Let Vietnam make the clothes. We're making cool stuff now, right? 20 years from now, Vietnam's going to do the same thing. Vietnam's going to say, let Uganda make the toy. I don't care. Let Zimbabwe make the clothes. We'll make it right. This is what nations do. And people freak out as you move up and as you shed industry, but that's a good thing. That's what opens up the opportunity to make even cooler things. Okay, so I know that was kind of a mouthful there to explain that, but I think it really helps seeing it in these terms, why losing industry can be a good thing, because on the surface you would never think it was a good thing, but it actually can be, especially if we don't have the comparative advantage in it. Go ahead and let it go. We'll do the things we're really good at, other nations do what they're good at, and in the end we all end up having more. So there you go, the three main arguments you'll hear against free trade, and again, why I don't necessarily agree with those as a problem. So as always, if you have any questions, let me know. I'll be glad to discuss with you or talk you through it. But otherwise, until next time, stay healthy and happy.